Ohai. The Republic of Singapore, the city-state located on the islands in Southeast Asia, separated from the southernmost tip of the Malacca Peninsula by the narrow Jakorski Passage. Borders on the Sultanate Johor, which is a part of Malaysia, and on the province of the island of Rio, which is a part of Indonesia. Singapore is considered the second in safety city on Earth after Tokyo. The square of Singapore makes 728.6 km. For June 2021. It gradually increases thanks to the program of an alluvium of the territory operating since the 1960s. Now the state of Singapore consists of 63 islands. The largest of them, Singapore. The main island, Ubin, Tikong Besar, abuses Sentosa, Semakau and Sudan. The highest point, Hill Bukit 163.3 m. The first mentions of Singapore are available in the Chinese chronicles of the 3rd century. The island was an empire Srivid's highest stronghold, with the center on Sumatra, and Tumasuk bore the Javanese name. Tumasuk sometime was important shopping center, but then fell into decay. About him very few certificates except separate archaeological finds remained. In the 15th, 16th centuries, Singapore was a part of a Sultanate Johor. During the Dutch-Portuguese War of 1617, Singapore was attacked by the Portuguese troops. The British Governor-General Benkalina Stamford Raffles arrived to Singapore on January 28, 1819, and soon saw the potential for construction of new port in the island. Formerly, at the time, the Sultan Johor, controlled by Dutchies and Budgeets, and who wasn't wanting to have communications with British, ruled the island. Nevertheless, his officials were more loyal to his elder brother Hussein, applying for his throne. Raffles knew it and, without having on that any powers, declared him the lawful sultan and offered a salary of $30,50. In exchange, the new sultan provided to the British trading floor in Singapore and the right to operate the island. The formal contract was signed on February 6, 1819. So modern Singapore arose. Before Raffles' arrival, the island was inhabited only by about 1,000 local Malayans and small community of Chinese. By 1860, the population of Singapore quickly expanded up to 80,000 at domination of the Chinese community. Many of early immigrants came to work at a plantation of pepper and a gambier. Later, in 1890, when the rubber industry was created, the island became the center of production and export of rubber and tin. In 1867, Singapore became colony of Great Britain. British attached to Singapore great value as to an important strong point on the way to China. During World War II, Japan occupied Malaya and won the Battle of Singapore, despite significant superiority of the British in manpower. It was result of a strategic miscalculation. The British expected attack of Japanese from the sea, and those passed through all Malaya by land and attacked Singapore from less strengthened party. On February 15, 1942, Singapore passed to Japan up to her defeat in September 1945. Since 1951, Singapore became the self-governed state as a part of the British Empire. After elections of 1959, the position of the Prime Minister was held by Lee Kuan Yew.
In 1963, as a result of a referendum, Singapore was included into Federation Malaysia together with the state the Malayan Federation and the former British colonies Northern Borneo and Sarawak.
On August 7, 1965, as a result of the conflict, Singapore left Federation Malaysia and on August 9, 1965 declared independence.
An exit of Singapore was rather painless, as the management of Federation considered that his stay-in structure of Malaysia strongly breaks ethnic balance of advantage of the Chinese population.
At the time of independence, finding Singapore represented the small poo country which had to import even fresh water and construction sand. Neighboring countries were adjusted unfriendly, and a third of the population sympathized with communists. Himself and the colleagues Lee Kuan Yew characterized as group of the bourgeois, caught the English education leaders. The strategy of economic development by the government of Lee Kuan Yew was based on transformation of Singapore into financial and shopping center of Southeast Asia, and also on involvement of foreign investors. We welcomed each investor. We just from a skin of one's client to help him to begin production, Lee Kuan Yew wrote. The country leaders attached great value to gaining investor confidence.
For example, during oil crisis of 1973, Lee Kuan Yew personally notified representatives of oil corporations that Singapore,
unlike many other countries, won't limit turnover of oil and fuel in warehouses in any way, and the more so to expropriate them. A special government official who worked with it day and night was assigned to each large company showing interest in Singapore, immediately providing any information which those needed, and didn't lag behind them until they after all didn't agree to visit Singapore. As a result of purposeful policy, the American multinational corporations laid the foundation for the large-scale high-tech industry of Singapore, and this small state became, in particular, large producer of electronics.
At the same time, the American companies on production electronic engineers created so many jobs that unemployment wasn't anymore a problem.
Customs tariffs were at the same time repealed that resulted in bankruptcy of the inefficient enterprises for production of cars, refrigerators and TZ. When Lee Kuan Yew asked the finance director of the Mercedes company as long Singapore should keep a protectionist tariff for support of local car assembly plant, I received the answer, always. We without hesitation cancelled tariffs and allowed the plant to go bankrupt, Lee Kuan Yew in the memoirs wrote. When finding independence, Singapore suffered from high corruption. Lee Kuan Yew so characterized situation. Corruption is one of lines of an Asian way of life. People openly accepted remuneration, it was a part of their life.
Fight against corruption began by simplification of procedures of decision-making and removal of any ambiguity in laws as a result of the addition of clear and simple rules, up to cancellation of permissions and licensing.
Wages of judges were sharply raised, to judicial positions, the best private lawyers were involved.
The salary of the Singapore judge reached several honeycombs thousands of dollars a year.
In the 1990s, over $1 million. Triads, organized criminal groups, were rigidly suppressed. The staff of police was replaced from mainly Malayans with mainly Chinese. This process was followed by excesses, and Lee Kuan Yew personally came to arrangement of the rebelled Malayan police officers for negotiating. The government employee holding important posts raised wages to the level characteristic of top managers of private corporations. The independent body for the purpose of fight against corruption in higher levels was created.
Investigations were initiated, even demanding close relatives of Lee Kuan Yew.
A number of the ministers and the higher-ranking officials convicted of corruption or were sentenced to various imprisonment terms, either committed suicide or fled the country. Among them there were also old colleagues of Lee Kuan Yew, for example, the Minister of Environmental Protection Vy Tong Boon. As a result, Singapore, according to the international ratings, became one of the least corrupted states of the world.
Lee Kuan Yew in the memoirs emphasized that he constantly spread the principle of rule of law and equality of all before the law, including the high-ranking officials and the relatives.
The legislative system of the country was inherited from the English Colonial Board. In 1960, the 1970th years, the education system was reformed. In Singapore there was a set of various national schools which received uniform minimum standards. English became obligatory for studying at all schools. Higher education institutions were transferred to teaching in English. The government spent large sums for training of the Singapore students at the best universities of the world. The government attached great value to make most of the population homeowners. In the 1960th years, the system of mortgage lending was created, housing construction sharply grew, and by 1996 only 9% of apartments were rented, and the others were busy by owners. It is helped also by a property tax which makes 3.7% of the potential price of rent for the living owner and 10% for the real estate which is leased.
From 1965 to 1990, the DDD per capita level in the country grew from $400 to $12.
2000, and in the next decade Singapore was included into 10 the richest states of the world. The happened changes became history as the Singapore economic miracle. In 1990, Lee Kuan Yew left the Prime Minister's post.
National economy continued to develop the accelerated rates, and size DDD per capita at the beginning of the odd years exceeded the corresponding indicator of the USA.
On August 10, 2004, the 63-year-old Prime Minister of Singapore Goh Chok Tong, holding this post of 14 years, submitted the official resignation to the President of the Republic Sr. Nathan. The government was headed by 52-year-old Lee Hsien Loong, the eldest son Lee Kuan Yew, who occupied as well a post of the Minister of Finance.
The 80-year-old Lee Kuan Yew, holding a position of the senior minister after the leaving the power, received the status of the advisor of the government.
I borrowed till 2011. The ruling party, National Action, on elections of 1991 received 61% of votes. That became the worst result for her history. But in 2006, 67% of voters, in 2015, 70% voted for her.
Singapore maintains diplomatic relations with 186 countries of the world, though his embassies aren't in many of them.
Is a member of the Union, the British Commonwealth, ASEAN and non-aligned movement.
Relationship with Indonesia and Malaysia is the most important, despite difficult separation from the Second and Indonesian-Malaysian confrontation of 1963-1966, where Indonesia opposed creation of Malaysia.
Singapore has good relations with Great Britain, with which I signed 5 defensive contracts and also with Malaysia, Australia and New Zealand. Good relations are maintained also with the United States of America. The USA is considered as the stabilizing force as opposed to regional powers.
Singapore is a supporter of the concept of Southeast Asian regionalism and plays an active role in ASEAN as the founder of this organization.
Is a DIC of the Forum Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, which secretariat is in Singapore.
As the full participant of the United Nations, Singapore was a temporary DIC in the Security Council in 2001-2002.
I participated in peacekeeping operations of the Union and I was an observer in Kuwait, Angola, Namibia, Cambodia and East Timor. Leaders of Singapore adhere to realistic views of foreign policy. They perceive the world according to Hobbes, recognizing the right strong. To the politician defensive situation. According to a geographical location. Distinguishes mistrust from Malaysia and Indonesia for the historical reasons and perception of Singapore, a small red spot in the Sea of Greens, according to the President of Indonesia, Bakhruddin Yusuf of Habibie. Sinnathamby Rajaratnam was the first Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and the foreign policy of the state still follows his precepts. Rajaratnam initially formed a course, taking the jungle of international policy into account and was a supporter of care because of presence of constant external enemies. In 1966 Rajaratnam saw a task in providing to the country survival, the world and stable prosperity in the region experiencing mutual suspiciousness between the states, internal instability, economic disintegration and the conflicts between big powers. According to this outlook, the foreign policy of Singapore is aimed at maintenance of friendship with all states, especially with Malaysia, Indonesia, the ASEAN countries, and also has to guarantee that no measures will raise tensions at the authorities of neighboring countries.
In 1972 Rajaratnam assumed that the world is the back of Singapore, that is integration into world economy will improve position of Singapore and will increase his stocks of natural resources which aren't enough.
Thus, Rajaratnam believed that maintenance of balance of forces is priority, as opposed to transformation of Singapore into the actual vassal of more major powers, and will become a basis for formation of free independent foreign policy. The interests of great powers in Singapore will also keep the regional states from intervention in freedom of action on the world scene. Is one of founders of ASEAN. The Secretariat of APEC. Principal organ of the organization. Is in Singapore and was host of this forum in 2009.
Representations of Singapore are in Brunei, Cambodia, the People's Republic of China, India, Israel, Japan, South Korea, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Thailand and Vietnam.
In Embassy of North Korea Singaporeans work.
Relations between two countries appeared long before formation of People's Republic of China in October 1949.
The Chinese migrants, escaping from poverty and wars, for a long time fled to Singapore, which then was a part of Malaya. Many Singapore Chinese have roots in Fujian, Guangdong and Hainan. Diplomatic relations between two states officially began on October 3, 1990.
Singapore was the last state in Southeast Asia which officially recognized the People's Republic of China out of respect for Indonesia and fear of the communistic countries at the time. It still supports military cooperation with the Republic of China.
Taiwan. Under the Agreement of 1975 because of a lack of the place for exercises in the state. In reply, China suggested to move the Singapore training grounds from Taiwan to Hainan. Singapore is the 9th largest partner of China, and the People's Republic of China the 3rd for Singapore. 10% of all trade turnover of the last happened to China.
One more confirmation of strong links of two states or investments of Singapore into the industry of China, for example Suzhou Industrial Park and financial aid in 2008 for elimination of a consequence and support of the population of China after the Sichuan earthquake.
During the British Board, up to obtaining independence of Malaysia in 1965, Singapore and the Republic of China had diplomatic relations which continued also after declaration of independence.
In 1990, when diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China were established, Singapore wanted to keep good relations with Taiwan and conducted serious negotiations on this occasion with China. Throughout some time after obtaining independence by Singapore and before establishment of the Republic of China, an informal relationship between two parties remained.
Taiwan had a representation in Singapore which, in turn, had the trade mission on Taiwan. Main directions of cooperation: military cooperation and defense. For example, the Singapore military bases were located on Taiwan for conducting joint exercises. Despite all disagreements between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China, Singapore always sought to keep a relationship with Taiwan to show the neutrality to such tension. Though he officially supports policy of uniform China, also Singapore, the only state which still have the military bases on Taiwan and dispatching the troops to the island for annual exercises. Singapore has diplomatic relations with Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Romania, Russia, Ukraine, Great Britain and others. In August 2005, Malaysia, Indonesia and Singapore reached the agreement to carry out joint anti-counterfeiting patrols in the Passage Malacca for the best safety on one of the most important maritime routes. Later Thailand joined them.
Singapore is located on 63 islands, including the island Singapore or Pulau Adzon.
In his Sultanate Johor in Malaysia conduct two main artificial means of communication. A dam Singapore Johor in the north and the second connection in the west. Between Shoes in Singapore and Tan Tong Kupang in Johor. Islands Jurong, Pulau Tikon, Pulau Ubin and Sentosa, the largest of the other islands of Singapore. The highest natural point, Hill Bukit Timah, 166 meters high.
During implementation of projects of an alluvium of the earth, the square of Singapore was increased from 581.5 square
km in the 1960th up to 728.6 km.
For June 2021.
This area can grow by 100 square km till 2030.
Some projects use merge of smaller islands and earth alluvium to create bigger and more functional island, as was with the island Jurong.
5% of the earth of Singapore are considered as reserves. Because of an urbanization, mainly tropical forests disappeared. The Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, the only considerable remained tropical forest. The city is almost on the equator, therefore temperature fluctuations of climate are minimum. Average temperature of January is 2°C lower than the average temperature of June, according to the coldest and the hottest months. Equatorial climate. Osakov drops out always much, from 170 to 250 May month. The lowest temperature in the city was +20°C, the highest, +36.1°C. The average annual minimum makes +25°C, an average annual at most +31.1°C.
Deviations from the specified temperatures are possible, however the scorching heat happens rather seldom.
+20°C or below cold snaps doesn't happen. Singapore, the Parliamentary Republic. Executive power belongs to the cabinet headed by the Prime Minister. The President carries out more representative role, but in some cases can veto critical decisions. In Singapore since 1965, the National Action Party, English People's Action Party, PAP, politically dominates. Critics call Singapore de facto the one-party country and accuse National Action of suppression of opposition. Nevertheless, such opposition party as the Labour Party is represented in Parliament. Reporters Without Borders in 2005 put Singapore on the 140th place in the Index of Freedom of the Press from 167 countries. Despite it, the government of Singapore created extremely effective and transparent market economic system in the country.
Besides, the government has reputation honest and not corrupted. Various researchers constantly put Singapore in the top 10 of the least corrupted countries in the world and on the first place on absence of corruption in Asia.
See the Index of Perception of Corruption. Singapore is a part of such international organizations as the British Commonwealth of Nations, the Union, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, diplomatic relations with the USSR, later Russia, are established in 1968. Crime rate in Singapore, one of the lowest in the world. At the same time, laws in Singapore rather severe, including it is provided and the death penalty is applied.
Manifestations of interethnic hostility and hatred are punished by the law.
Even discussions on the internet are considered. Some crimes are punished by a beating sticks. Especially cruel murders and drug traffic are punished by the death penalty through hanging.
During the period from 1991 to 2004, 420 death sentences for the crimes connected with drugs were carried out, or one of the highest rates in the world.
According to the Law Internal Security Act, for a sentence to the dick of a triad, mafia group, was testimonies of 3 witnesses about participation in a triad enough? At the same time, witnesses remained anonymous, but not for law enforcement agencies, as otherwise people would refuse to give evidences. As a result of a triad were liquidated in Singapore. The similar procedure was applied against communists, and now, demanding Islamic terrorists. Advantages: favorable investment climate, strong institutes, the highly competitive environment, the leading places in the ratings of economic freedom, the highly educated and disciplined population, one of the highest standards of living in the world, and the income of the population. Weaknesses: dependence on import deliveries of almost all food, water and energy. Deficiency of the territory. Singapore, the advanced country with market economy and low taxation, in which an important role is played by multinational corporations. Gross national product per capita, one of the highest in the world. In 2015, $85,000 of the USA at par purchasing power.
In the rating of competitiveness of the WEF, the economy of Singapore took the second place in 2018.
For comparison, in 2008, the fifth place from 134 countries. According to IM Business School, the economy of Singapore is the most competitive in the world. Singapore is attractive to investors because of low tax rates. In total in Singapore 5 taxes, from which 1 income tax, 1 a payroll tax. Total rate of taxes of 27.1%. Takes the 5th place in the rating of tax systems of the world. Only 4 types of import goods are subject to taxation when importing: alcoholic drinks, tobacco products, oil products and cars. Singapore is ranked as East Asian tigers for fast jump of economy to the level of the developed countries. In the country, productions of electronics, shipbuilding, the sector of financial services are developed. One of the largest producers of CD drives. Large-scale researches in the field of biotechnologies are conducted. The Singapore holding Raffles owns the international hotel chain Swissôtel. The economy strongly depends on export, especially in the field of consumer electronics, information technologies, pharmaceutics. Singapore, the largest trade power of the region. The volume of foreign trade, 2008. About $455.3 billion. Export minus $235.8 billion, including products of the electronic and electrotechnical industry, consumer goods, products of processing of natural rubber, oil products. Generally, I went to Malaysia, 12.9%. Hong Kong, 10.5%. Indonesia, 9.8%. China, 9.7%. The USA, 8.9%. Japan, 4.8%. Thailand, 4.1%. 2007. Import minus $219.5 billion. Machines and equipment, fuel, chemical goods, food. Main partners in import: Malaysia, 13.1%. USA, 12.5%. China, 12.1%. Japan, 8.2%. Taiwan, 5.9%. Indonesia, 5.6%. South Korea, 4.9%. 2007. In 2001, Singapore experienced economic difficulties in connection with world crisis in the field of technologies. In 2005 the economy rose again. Real GDP growth for the period between 2004 and 2007 averaged 7%, but decreased to 1.2% in 2008 as a result of global financial crisis. Inflation minus 2.3%. 2008. Unemployment in 2008 made 2%. In 2005, 3.3%. In 2010 DDD growth was 15.2%, however in the next years decreased to 5%. The Singapore port belongs to a number of the largest ports of the world, and on many indicators keeps the first place. The largest airport in Singapore, the International Airport Changi. It is a large aviation hub in Southeast Asia. A passenger turnover, over 36 million people a year, goods turnover, over 1.9 million tons. Is around Changi in 17.2 km on the northeast of commercial center and occupies space in 13 square kilometers. The airport is a hub for the main carrier of Singapore, the Singapore Airlines. The airline is a division of Star Alliance. Administratively the country is divided into 5 districts. Since 2003 in Singapore the single-level system of taxation of the companies at which income is assessed only at the level of the company's works. Earlier operating imputation, a system of taxation at which of a tax obligation of the company the tax duty of the shareholder receiving dividends was subtracted is cancelled. The dividends received by resident founders of Singapore completely are exempted from taxation. The taxable profit of the company. Income minus expenses. Is assessed at the uniform rate of 17%, the company regardless is local or foreign. The law of Singapore on income tax. The income of the Singapore non-resident company gained from foreign sources, and not transferred to Singapore isn't subject to taxation by income tax at all.
Transfer of profit to Singapore means as money transferred to accounts of the company in Singapore and import in the form of cash, and acquisition on this profit of property in Singapore or property which will be imported into Singapore, and also repayment from the profit of the obligations which arose from legal relationship in Singapore.
By this principle of territoriality the tax system is similar to the systems of Gibraltar and Hong Kong, though has some differences. Besides corporate income tax and a tax on goods and services, the Singapore companies pay the property tax and also stamp duties. Tax administration is carried out by the Internal Revenue Service of Singapore. Property taxes for natural persons make 4% of the potential cost of rent for the owners living in the house, and 10% for housing which is leased. Singapore, the world's second country on population density after Monaco. The population on a state makes July 2021 5,866,139 people. In 2005 4.3 million. Differ in national structure from the neighboring Malaysia. As of 2020 most of the population is made by Chinese -74.3%. Malayans of different origin make 13.5%. Natives of India make 9%, the majority of which, Tamils, in smaller quantity, Malay, Punjabis and Bengalese. Other 3.2% also consist of absolutely different small ethnic groups. British, Arabs, Jews, Thais, Armenians, etc. Japanese and Métis. Eurasians. As of 2019, by estimates of the Union, 2.2 million immigrants, or 37.1% of the population of the country, lived in Singapore. Singapore, the multi-religious country. As of 2020, 31.1% of the population profess Buddhism, 20% are not religious, 18.9% adhere to Christianity, 15.6% Islam, 8.8% Taoism and the Chinese beliefs, 5.0% Hinduism, 0.6% other. In the last 20 years, only the share of not religious people, Christians and Muslims, grew. The share of representatives of other faiths gradually decreases. Most of the Chinese population follow the traditional beliefs combining Taoism, Confucianism, the Buddhism and ancient animism. Most of Muslims, Malayans, but practice Islam also other people. Among Christians are presented both Catholicism and other faiths, in particular, Methodism, Presbyterianism, the Assemblies of God. The Armenian Apostolic Church is also available. The Orthodox community. The Hinduism prevails among natives of the southern India.
Tamils, a Malayala, a Kannada and Telugu,
who make the majority in the Indian community of Singapore. The vast majority of Hindus are followers of Shaivism. Among Tamils, the cult of a lingam is widespread. The others, Shaktism. Especially Malal, in Singapore, are presented subsects of Shaktism of a Vamashar and a Dakshinakar, and Vaishnava. The recommitment to observance of the exclusive bans and restrictions is characteristic of local Hindus. There are followers of Sikhism, Jainism and Zoroastrianism.
Characterized religious policy of Lee Kuan Yew as follows.
When Saudi Arabia began to advance Wahhabism, we, fortunately, didn't let them to us, having begun to build the mosques. We don't need their money or their preachers. According to him, it is intervention in affairs of other countries, an attempt of distribution of Islam by means of oil money, and the Wahhabism separates itself from all others and rejects back, in the 7th century. After the serious national conflicts played in Singapore in the 1968 years, the government began to watch carefully a national relationship and proclaimed the principle of harmony, to which education systems, housing, army and other social spheres follow. From 1978 years the conflicts practically stopped. Now it is forbidden to carry Islamic scarves at schools. In October 2005, for racist comments, one internet user was sentenced to a month of prison.
According to Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore successfully integrates all religions and the people except Islam.
According to him, in other communities integration happens easier, friendship, mixed marriages, etc. Indians to Chinese, Chinese to Indians, but not at Muslims. According to Lee Kuan Yew, the new generation of Malayans is more Islamized as a result of the wave going from the Arab states. Consequences is a barrier in society, and think it becomes intentionally. Islam seeks to separate the head of the country considered. The immigration policy didn't encourage growth of a share of Muslims in structure of the population, and the domestic policy stimulated Malayans to use English as the main means of communication. According to Lee Kuan Yew, the Malayans using Hausa's English are aimed at prosperity in society, and aren't subject to the extremist ideas. Singapore has an effective healthcare system, despite rather low budgetary expenses in comparison with the developed countries. The World Health Organization places Singapore on the 6th place in the world in the report. It is reached by the fact that over 20% of expenses on treatment are paid by patients over an insurance, who are as a result interested in economy of means. In general, Singapore has the lowest level of child mortality in the world for the last 20 years. The average expected life expectancy in Singapore -79 years for men and 83 for women. On this indicator, the country takes the 15th place in the world ranking. Almost all population has access to quality water and the sewerage. Annually, less than 10 people die of AIDS in the country. Immunization level is high. An obesity indicator at adult age, less than 10%. The healthcare system is based on 3 principles: Medifund provides protection for those someone aren't able to afford medical care. The obligatory scheme of medical savings, which covers about 85% of the population. MediShield, the scheme of medical insurance substantially financed by the state for the deadly diseases demanding expensive treatment. The state hospitals in Singapore have autonomy of rather management decisions and compete for patients. For persons with low income, there are schemes of subsidies.
In 2008, the healthcare system was financed for 31.9%, that makes about 3.5% of GDP of Singapore.
The indigenous Malayan people of Singapore makes only small percent, and the majority, the Chinese, Indian or Arab immigrants, as carriers of original culture, sometimes allocate the Eurasian Singaporeans and Peranakan, descendants of the Chinese immigrants, and their Malayan wives.
A safe national situation led to diffusion of different cultures, and for a short time there was inherent only in Singapore an originality.
In Singapore there is a number of ethnic areas, such as Little India, Small India, and Chinatown. Areas appeared as a result of the plan of Raffles on adaptation of new immigrants through national ghettos. Now these areas lost the former value, but remain the cultural centers where national goods are on sale and national restaurants work. The government monitors respect for the principle of tolerance, including behind freedom of worship. In Singapore there are several Hindu, Buddhist and Taoist temples, and also mosques and Christian churches. There are also heterodox religious groups. The cosmopolitan orientation of the Singapore culture resulted in a variety of literature, art forms, music and theatre. The important place is taken by the writers writing in Malay. Masuri S.N. Muhammad Naim Dapi, Yunus bin Ishaq, Asma Khalili, etc. The playwright Stella Khan is distinguished from English-speaking writers. The source isn't specified. 615 days in 2003 in Singapore, the new theatre Esplanada. In a form, the durian reminding local fruit. On a large number of places in which performances and representations are held was constructed and open. The city is decorated by numerous sculptures, including Salvador Dali's Newton. Official languages are English, Iputanqua, Malayan and Tamil. From the moment of independence, finding the administration actively uses English. The large-scale campaign, You Speak on Iputanqua, was conducted for association of all dialects of Chinese. Many announcements, newspapers and editions are printed only on English and Chinese. The English introduced through schools got also street form, so-called, to which still it is possible to add the mixed Malay and English. Nevertheless, the Singapore literature and official institutions use standard English. Singapore has the state education system, one of the best in the world. The main language of training accepted English, with the purpose to fasten the multinational state and rather to join the global world.
6 local higher education institutions, including the State National University of Singapore, work in the country.
Merlion, a mythical animal, related to griffins and dragons, meets in several art traditions. The image of a being with the head of a lion and a fish tail which allegedly protected ancient Singapore, incinerating his enemies, a red fiery look, it is possible to see in India, on walls in the Temple Ajanta and Mat Kure, on ancient Etruscan coins of the period of Hellenism, and also on the coats of arms of the English county of Norfolk, city of Manila, Philippines, and the Ostindijske Company. According to a legend, very long time ago the monster with the head of a lion and a trunk of fish which rose in defense of locals lived here. At the sight of the enemy it sunbathed eyes by red light and incinerated enemies. If there was a whole gale, then it left water and saved people from death. And in memory of the Savior, the fountain in the form of semi-fish semi-lion is built. Its height is 8.6 m, weight is 70 tons and cost is 165,000 Singapore dollars. Author sculptor Lim Nan Seng. It is constructed in 1972. In the Malayan Chronicle, Sulalata Salatan. The Malayan genealogies of princes Malayans by the name of Sang Nila of Utam, governing approximately from 1299 to 1347, the son of the Indian prince Raji Kulan and the underwater princess. Having seen an unusual animal on the island Temasek that meant the city by the sea, the prince began to find out from the subordinates about his name. Nobody knew, and only one wise man could distinguish a lion. The lions here were never found.
It so impressed the prince that he decided to rename the island into Singapore, in honor of a graceful animal.
Main and most known attractions of Singapore: Changi Airport, Merlion Statue, Lion Mermaid City Symbol, the Singapore Zoo in which animals contain in nature, gardens at the Gulf Gardens by the Bay,
Marina Bay Sands Hotel ship with the survey platform on a roof, from where all Singapore clearly.
Big Wheel,
Greenhouses of Flower Dome 1 and Dome 2,
Raffles Hotel, Siloso Beach, Tanjong Beach, the reserve, Bukit Timah, -70 hectares of the untouched tropical forest. The Park of Birds of Churong, of 20 hectares where the great number of tropical birds lives. The Island of Entertainments of Sentosa, with Universal Studio, oceanariums, attractions for children and adults, with golf courses. Clarke Quay Embankment received the name in honor of Sir Andrew Clarke, the second Governor of Singapore. Along the mooring, the warehouses of the 19th century, belonging generally to Chinese, lasted. In the early 90s this zone drew attention of town planners and was turned into a compact complex of shops, pubs, floating restaurants and craft benches. From this embankment, tours down the river on walking boats are organized. Singapore, one of the largest international centers of cultivation of decorative fishes for export. The most important, dominating looking export of decorative fishes of Singapore, Polea reticulata. Other important types are Pterophyllum scolari, Polea latipina, Polea senaps, Xiphophorus halleri, Xiphophorus maculatus, Barbuso, representatives of family Heratsinavi and Gurum. On a legend, the first prince from Sumatra who saw a being with the lion's head and a fish tail stepped here.
The settlement founded by him received the name City of a Lion, and to a mythical animal built the temple.
Residents of Singapore, honoring traditions, call the city of a lion and the temple. Since 1948, Singapore participates in the Summer Olympic Games. Since 2008 in Singapore, the night stage of Formula One is carried out.
The Grand Prix of Singapore of 2008 became a night stage, the first in the history of Formula One.
In 2010 in Singapore played the first Youth Olympic Games. In 2014 in Singapore, the largest in the region, National Stadium, is open, with a capacity of 55,000 people. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.